Mr. Topow, come on up. By the way, this picture right here I took. You guys know that I love candy. So I took this when he was on the phone lead generating. He was standing out there and he had his hands like this. You can't see it because he's got beautiful locks of hair. But he had his headphones on and he was lead generating up there. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I've got to put this on the Wolf of Wall Street poster because it was just such a moment." So thank you for being you, and thank you for being willing to sit down with me. So have a seat.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
So, Michael, tell us about yourself. I know a lot of people see you here in the office as an agent, but tell us about who you really are.
That's a great question, right? First, if you guys know me or don't know me or know me really well, you guys know that first and foremost, right, I try to be a man of God, try to be a good husband and a good father.
Don't try.
That's right, I do. That's right, thank you, Scott. And always try to start with like a servant mentality, right? I really mirrored and felt Mike's message when he said that, right? We're here to serve, right? If anyone has done any piece of business with me or has gone door knocking with me or even just has a meal with me, we try to start God first.
So what does that servant mentality look like to you in business and in your real estate business?
I mean, it goes back to our core values, right? Always do the right thing, put others' needs before your own. And if you do that, then the results just happen at that point, right?
Yeah. So talk to us about your business a little bit.
Been in real estate now coming into my 7th year. I believe I've capped every single year in business.
Last week was one of them.
Last week was one of them, that's right. You know, and really I built the business from the ground up. The MREA teaches us about, you know, green light, red light, how to spend money, and where to spend money. And really it was always trying to lead with revenue first, right? If I spent any money, it was only for like a lead generation tool so that I can go and do the effort. Not until like the last year or two, I've actually spent money on social media or other types of campaigns, right? Always trying to start leading with revenue and let the money that you make then pay for those additional expenses to help you guys create more business.
Well, why is that important? Other than it's in the MREA.
Yeah, well,
why is
Gary
that important?
Keller said it's important. Let's just start there. You know, you can end up finding yourself spending money in areas that don't make any money, and then you could be out of the business before you even get started.
Yeah.
I believe that to be really, really important. I think the business is simple, but it's not easy. We need to spend time learning those key skills to get us to the level that we want to achieve. We've got to understand those conversations, right? We've got to understand the scripts, right? 6 responses, right, or 6 objections. You got to have 3 responses for every objection. That was what was said a little earlier, and that's factual, right? We have to be ready. We have to be equipped. If we're not ready or equipped, what does the client think about you?
Yeah. So what did you do before real estate?
Yeah, I went to the University of Miami, and then after that we had a couple, different opportunities. That's right, Jenny. But before real estate, I was with Enterprise Rent-A-Car for almost 7 years, and had a very, very successful career. Ran multiple locations, ran airport locations. At some points, I'd have hundreds of employees working under me, and that was a really, really great experience. And at some point, I was working about 70 hours a week.
Wow.
And I'll kind of share a personal kind of story, 2 stories I think that kind of crystallize everything. If you guys know, my family's from all over the world. My father is from Switzerland, and he came and he stayed with us for like a week, 2 weeks. And I probably had one of my worst enterprise career days ever. I was, leaving the house by 6 in the morning, get into the office by 7. I was running a location in West Palm. And that day, I didn't get home till 9 o'clock.
Wow.
Right? And we sat down to have dinner. They all waited for me. And if I had said 3 words at the dinner table, that was a lot. It was one of my top 3 most difficult days at Enterprise. And Jessica looked at me, my father looked at me, and they just simply said, you're killing yourself, right? You can't continue at this pace. So that started the conversation. Okay, well then what's next? What do I do? I've already created a really great career at Enterprise. I started to make real money, at least what I thought was real money, right? At least what I thought was real money. And, started to plan, right? We put a plan in place, right? We want to keep our house in order, and we put reserves away for 6 months. You get into this business, and it's not easy. My first year in this business, I think I did like 14 or 16 transactions. Sounds like a lot, but realistically, I think it generated me like $20,000 or $25,000. That's nothing. So we had to plan. So we did. And that was kind of the start of it. So here's a funny story talking about what real money looks like. I call my best friend, he's in Maryland, and I call him and I'm looking at my W-2 at Enterprise. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I call him all excited. I'm like, hey, Mike, I just had my best year ever. I made $75,000. And he's like, man, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. I know your parents, right? I know how hard they've worked and how hard you work. And I'm putting in 70 hours a week, guys, dealing with incredible accounts. And I'm dealing with the people that want to rent a car for $9.99. I'll let you figure that out. I'm getting my teeth kicked in, guys, right?
Yeah.
But I looked at my W-2 and I was like, man, that's awesome, right? Coming from a family where my mother had to work 2 jobs to get me a pair of sneakers, right?
It's perspective.
It's perspective, right? My mother will never make the money that I've made, never. And then I'm not taking anything away from her, but I'm just being open. So I talked to my friend. I'm like, man, I made 75 grand. He's like, man, I'm so proud of you. I know your background. I know where you've been. So what happens next, right? I'm like, hey man, how'd you do? How'd you do, right? Before this whole thing of comparing yourself to others and kind of that mindset. He's like, yeah man, I had my best year ever too. Like, yo man, that's awesome. I'm excited, man. That's incredible. He's like, yeah man, we did really great. And I was like, okay. So how'd you do? He's like, man, I did great. I'm like, dude, it's me. You can tell me.
Yeah.
It's me.
Yeah.
He's like, you really want to know, Mike? Ah, man, I shouldn't have asked. I asked him, and he's like, you really want to know? I'm like, yeah, man, it's me. He says, I made $1.2 million. Just to find out 2 or 3 months later from him that the 1.2 was actually 1.6. Now, I'm not saying that was the only reason why I came to real estate, but it sure helped. It sure helped, right?
What changed for you in that moment in hearing that, sharing your big win and hearing his number and not knowing the whole don't compare your insides to other people's outsides, things like that. What changed for you in that moment?
Man, I know you're not working as hard as me. Right? Like,
So you got a little bit pissed off.
Not pissed off. I'm just thinking like we're hustling backwards.
Yeah.
Right? We're hustling backwards. Right? To go out there and work 70 hours a week for someone else to generate a wealth, to generate a lifestyle that we want to live. I just was thinking to myself, man, I'm doing this all wrong. There's got to be a better way. And that's when we started putting in the plan in place. Right? I was working 70 hours a week, perceived to make really great money. And look, again, $75,000 is great money. I'm not going to take that away from anybody. But to understand your worth, your value, and what it meant for my family, right? Because wealth isn't just financial, right? Wealth is health, wealth is time. And I started to get pieces of my life back.
Yeah. So you made the transition.
Yeah.
You got into real estate. From that conversation, how long was it until you transitioned?
That's a great question. It's funny because I was en route to my next promotion, right? My next promotion would have been about 60 to 90 days out, which would have took me to over 100,000.
Okay.
But I simply, we just started kind of, was probably about 6 months, 8 months. Like we took some time to really prepare for it.
Yeah.
Right. So we gritted our teeth. We continued to work. We continued to put in the time. And even though I knew I was leaving, I still gave them my best. Right. Operating in the highest level of integrity. But we started planning as a family. Like, okay, if we're really going to do this, then let's be ready for it. So it took about 6 or 8 months.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I always admire and respect about you is you have massive skills in connecting with people on the phone. If you have never been in the office just to hang out and listen to him, you're really good at it. Where did that come from?
Some inherent skills.
Okay.
Right, I think some of us are born with inherent sales ability, so fortunately that's one of my gifts. But then taking in the time.
You're probably dealing with those $9.99 people, right?
Well, that. You got any charges? Sorry, bad joke. But no. I mean, you have the inherent skill, but you've got to work at your craft, right? It's always about working on your craft. And understanding sales guys, they will always show you how to close them. They'll always show you.
What do you mean by that?
If you're willing to listen, right? Really listen to these verbal and nonverbal cues, right? They will always show you how to close them. And I'm not using the word close in a negative connotation. I'm using the word close as they'll always show you a way how you can help them.
Yeah.
Right? Always. Just being able to be, one of my gifts I feel is that I'm incredibly great at smelling, seeing, and hearing opportunity. This is a skill set that you guys should really, really consider working on.
How do you get better at that?
Practice. Fail. Shit, I've failed a lot in this business.
$10.
Fuck, I've failed a lot more than that. But honestly, that's got to be a bigger one, I think, right? Excuse me, guys, I'm sorry. But thousands and thousands of calls, thousands and thousands of door knocks, thousands and thousands of rejections. That makes you stronger, right? You start to develop this tougher skin, but more importantly, you start asking yourself, why did they say no? A true kind of way to guarantee, to see and ask yourself, if am I a really good person in sales or in service, is you should ask yourself, well, why did they say no?
Yeah.
There's got to be this level of self-reflection so that the next time that comes around, you're prepared for it.
Yeah, and ask yourself the question, how do I get better? Right?
That's right. And,
Yeah.
the way to get better is surrounding yourself with people who know more.
Yeah. So how do you motivate yourself to do things well that you don't enjoy doing?
Man, let me call Scott Tolar and ask him that question. Right? Lead generation isn't fun, guys. Door knocking isn't fun, but you just do it, right? Like there's a great video that we've watched about just do it and do it and do it, right? A college professor, ex-football coach or something, right? Your why needs to be ever present.
Yeah.
Right? What's important to you? What goals do you want to reach? Who will be impacted by the level of success that you can acquire, or even worse, how are they impacted if you don't succeed?
So what advice would you give to everyone sitting out there today that needs to take the next step and they may be hesitating?
Ask yourself if you're in the right business. Because if you're not willing to put in the effort, then maybe you should consider a 9 to 5. Right? The business predicates with your activity. No one's going to go out there and just give you business.
Yeah.
Right? And if those that are on the fence, like, okay, really ask yourself deeply, like, am I willing to do what's necessary to achieve the level of success that I'd like to have? Do you want it? Or is it just a figment of your imagination? Like, do you really want it?
You know, it reminds me, you saying that reminds me of when I heard John Maxwell speak. He was talking about somebody coming up to him after one of the speeches he had just given, and this person said to him, "I want to do what you do."
Mm.
And he responded and looked at them and said, "Are you willing to do what I've done to do it?"
Mm.
And that, you know, that's a big piece that so many people don't look at.
That's right.
And you kind of hit the nail on the head where when you said lead generation isn't fun. It's not fun to start,
Right.
but once you start seeing those results show
That's
up,
right. That's right.
you start looking at that activity like it's a lot more fun, right?
That's right. Absolutely. You can get to say, I just had a $50,000 month.
Now, the one last thing that I want to ask you about is this. You just had the largest closing you've ever had, $1.5 million.
1.6, but let's count
Sorry,
that.
1.6 million, please forgive me. And you and your buddy, the same buddy I'm assuming, is the one that you had that conversation with before.
Uh-huh.
You started talking about the year and then the month and
Yeah.
then the week. And tell me about that.
Yeah. So it's a really great kind of thing to push you guys forward and maybe even open up your mindset on generating wealth. As I was having conversations with my friend, right? He's been doing real estate since we graduated college, 18 years, something like that, right? And he's been in this business a long time. He operates a team of, 15 people. They'll do 250, 300 units this year. Big time, right? But he started to continue to open my mindset. He's like, look, I want you to think about it like this. Get yourself to a position where you're making $100,000 a year. Then get yourself into a position where you can make $100,000 in a month. Then get yourself in position to make $100,000 in a day. So I called him last week and I said, hey man, remember this conversation? He's like, yeah, but you forgot one thing. Don't forget to put $100,000 on your wrist.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, thank you for challenging and expanding our mindset today, because that right there, when you really break it down and you think about what does wealth do and what can wealth do for me,
Yeah.
when you look at it in that way of, I've had a $100,000 year, what would it look like to have a $100,000 month?
Yeah.
And you stretch yourself. If you've only had a $100,000 year up to that point, and that stretching you leads you to a $50,000 month,
Right.
nobody's upset with that,
Nobody.
right?
Yeah.
So, I really appreciate you and your heart for people, your dedication to your craft, and your consistency with lead generation. It's so incredible to see, and I know that you've really only just gotten started. So, thank you.
Scott. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Give it up for Mike.